Welcome to another episode of the Movement Disorder Journal and News Podcast. My name is Chris Denny. Today I am speaking with Dr. Julie Andersen and Dr. Minna Schmidt of the Buck Institute for Research in Aging. We go into the importance of gut health and where does Parkinson's disease really begin at? In the gut or in the brain? More and more researchers are becoming convinced that Parkinson's could start in the digestive system years before symptoms appear, potentially changing the way we think about the disease and how it might one day be detected and treated. Enjoy.
Sure. So I'm Julie Andersen. I'm a professor at the Buck Institute for Research in Aging, which is located in Marin County in California. And it opened about 25 years ago, and I've been here over that entire period. My specialty is neurodegenerative, studying basic mechanisms involved in neurodegenerative disease with an emphasis on Parkinson's disease.
Go ahead, Mina.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for having both of us. I'm very excited to talk to you today. I'm a postdoc in Julie's lab. I joined in 2015, and I come from a educational background steeped in chemistry. That was my original plan. But I became very interested in studying Parkinson's when a close family member of mine was diagnosed, and I switched tracks and I reached out to someone that I know in the field that I worked with, and they mentioned that Julie's lab was really the best lab to do anything related to Parkinson's. And I reached out and started working in her lab, learning a little bit initially about things that I had no idea about in biology. And I got my PhD in the lab and gravitated towards exploring some of our interests in the gut brain axis. And today we're doing some human data analysis, some work that I'm very excited about for its translational capabilities. And I'm very excited. And I've had a really great time in the lab. And um, I'm, yeah, just very excited to be a part of this work.
So, for those of us who don't know, um, tell us about Buck Institute for Research on Aging.
Sure. So this was an institute. The NIH had a call for research institutes on aging, and like 30 years ago, and fortuitously there was a woman, Beryl Buck, who lived in the Bay Area, and she left her estate towards the for the good of elderly, and it was good for the good of the elderly in Marin. But what the uh, estate decided to do with part of this money was to open a research institute to study aging. And so here at the Buck, we're like 25 research labs. We're an academic style research institute. People very many almost any type of disease which is associated with aging is studied here, as well as the basic process. And in our laboratory, we're sort of the Parkinson's research lab here at the Buck. So we've devoted over the last or for my career, the last 25, 30 years, really understanding basic mechanisms associated with Parkinson's disease. And that in part towards once you understand basic mechanisms, then it gives you a handle on potential therapeutics for the disease. And so we've both been involved in sort of trying to understand what causes the disease and then testing potential cures in preclinical models. And recently, through work primarily being spearheaded by Minna, going into human data sets and using artificial intelligence, using AI to try to suss out additional mechanisms that could be involved, letting the patients tell us what's going on from looking at their data and towards therapeutics for the disease.
Okay, so the paper that you all published in Nature Communications, unraveling the intersection of aging and Parkinson's disease, a collaborative roadmap for advancing research models. Um, I think in the email, one of your emails, you said it took 4 years to really put together.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting because so I've always sort of had my foot in each field, so very aware and deeply involved in research in Parkinson's disease, but also looking at what it is about aging that makes people more susceptible. And it's kind of surprising how many people in the Parkinson's field weren't really thinking about how aging impacts on the disease because the average age of onset is 65, and so there's definitely something about the aging process that's contributing. And so Michael J. Fox Foundation provided funding to really get together two groups of kind of disparate disparate research fields, which seems crazy, but it is true. So people who were involved in studying the basics of Parkinson's disease, understanding Parkinson's disease, and then people who are interested in processes that drive aging. Really kind of in across the body, but including in the brain, and trying to get those two groups to talk to each other and so it sort of was bringing together apples and oranges and trying to invoke a discussion between those groups and then work through, well, based on this shared knowledge of what we know about, let's say, preclinical mouse models of aging, which of those would be the best to help us gain an understanding of how aging is contributing to Parkinson's disease. So you can imagine if you have like 15, 20 scientists from different fields talking to each other, was really trying to come to a consensus about what we thought were the best model systems for studying the role of aging in Parkinson's disease.
Dr. Schmidt, you said you had a family member as well with
Yeah.
Parkinson's.
Yes. 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 So, my dad was diagnosed in 2012, and I, felt that I was on this path of getting my PhD in chemistry, and I felt that I really wanted to understand. Firstly, I actually needed to understand what Parkinson's was. When you first hear about it, and I hadn't heard anything about it before, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was actually something very different. And I wanted to focus my work on answering questions about Parkinson's, but I realized that there it, you, my approach to the chemist, like through the lens of chemistry, would be difficult without additional information in biology. So I kind of felt like I could uh, maybe create some tools for studying, and probably if I explored it further, I would come up with, or the group would come up with very unique approaches. But I felt like I was missing that link in biology, and so I started to learn more and more. And as I entered Julie's lab, I started to learn about how to perform biological experiments. What some of the initial experiments that we ran were something called high throughput assays. We took cell culture, so cells that have been that were initially isolated from either humans or mice, and they're changed in such a way to make them kind of immortal, and you can work with them in a much easier way in the lab. And I never done work like this before. I was taught by some really wonderful people in the lab. Um, and we ran a natural products screen, Julie. I don't know if you remember. This was like, yeah. So one of actually, it's interesting because one of the first projects we did was natural products, searching for natural products, and we got some really great hits, and we got one in particular, some of the mechanisms we were studying was actually hypoxia. And hypoxia is the response of our physiological response to low oxygen. So if we, hike up a really tall mountain, or even I think if we even, whenever our body starts to adapt to low oxygen, there are these pathways that are increased that Julie's lab is studying for their neuroprotective abilities. And so that was our search. And actually, that's how we ended up also kind of like as I continued to do my PhD work, and I got into this idea of exercise because I, wanted to look at how my dad feels, what he's going through. And I started reading blogs from people who have Parkinson's and their thoughts and their ideas. And as I was going through the PhD program, I had to submit a candidacy exam, and I had to come up with an original idea. And I felt like this was a chance for me to really think of, what like the structure of the program at the time was really I felt was just so so conducive to me having the intellectual freedom to explore any idea that I really wanted to. And this was the chance where I kind of could put things together that didn't necessarily come together initially for canonically maybe, or just and so I could just look for connections maybe that weren't necessarily there to begin with and start building. And that's how I came into this idea of studying. I think I always had this lens of like this perspective of looking at like chemical behaviors of different chemicals and how they may interact with proteins, and kind of looking at that scale. And so that's kind of where I wanted to look at lactic acid and its role in maybe protein aggregation, which is a big kind of even a hallmark of Parkinson's is the aggregation of this protein called alpha synuclein.
Right.
And protein aggregation is one of the hallmarks of aging, and that's highlighted in the paper as well. And so I was just trying to make these connections and trying to come to this of coming from like a 10,000-foot view of this is what's going on with my dad, or this is what's going on with people with Parkinson's. What's the thing that really helps them? And the thing that really helps them is exercise. But what does it do? What does it do on the molecular level? What does it do on the physiological level? And then how can we explain it on the molecular level? And that's kind of how and actually the gut brain aspect of our project came from a really early discussion with Julie when she mentioned gut brain axis. And that was the first time I had heard about this. And this was many years ago. Um, And it got me on that path. It just seemed so exciting, and I think, Julie, this had to do with, like, another project at the time, and it just seemed to, like, fit very it seemed to be, like, this unexplored area that was very curious to me, and I was very interested in trying to make connections that didn't really seem to be apparently there. So one of them was, how does exercise affect our microbiome in our gastrointestinal system? And that was like the premise of some of my candidacy work, some of my and then definitely the work that I'm doing now. So I've always uh like I've I've drawn inspiration from my observations, and I've kind of felt like it felt like very significant for me to try to look for answers in the work that we do in Julie's lab, from that
Yes, so
perspective.
sort of observing. So we know that exercise is one of the few things that seems to actually the slower, stop
Right.
disease progression. And separately, it's known that your gastrointestinal system and the microbes that are there can produce factors that can um, get into your bloodstream and affect your brain. But I think this connection between what does exercise do? Can exercise impact on what microbes you have in the gastrointestinal system? And could they be producing good factors that are neuroprotective in conditions like Parkinson's disease? So that's kind of the crux of what Minna's project is. And she's really going back to, I mean, Michael J. Fox Foundation has this wonderful data sets that they've collected in patients where they have data on various aspects, including, exercise frequency, so forth. And then they've got some microbiome data. So you can go into this huge amount of data from patients and ask, well, what, like, people who are exercising very frequently and um, what
Right.
what kind of microbiome, what is the makeup of the bacteria in their gut, and what factors can those bacteria make that might be protective, and that gives you a hypothesis. And I love that. So Mina's actually called this the idea of using prebiotics, figuring out which of which of the bacterial species are really neuroprotective and important, that you could have some type of treatment which is pre-probiotic that's selective for those bacteria that acts as a quote unquote exercise mimetic, right? That it's like the bacteria you'd be producing and the factors that you'd be producing during exercise that are helpful. And
Mhm.
that's kind of the crux of what Mina is looking at the human data now to figure out. And then the idea would be to go back into preclinical models to validate, oh, if we give a mouse these particular bacterial species of mouse that is prone to Parkinson's disease, would it slow the course of the disease? So it's a pretty cool concept, and it's a pretty cool connection to explore, and it's something that also um, could be made widely available fairly rapidly. You don't have to go through an FDA approval process, in order to at least provide information, right, about what bacteria are important,
Right.
s-
Right.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I have seen several studies that go back and forth between where they think uh, Parkinson starts at, where the alpha synuclein proteins
Yeah,
are. It's either in the gut or it's in the brain or a combination of the two.
you're you're you've touched on Mina's absolute, like, this is her absolute enthusiasm around it is this there is something, and I'll let you elaborate, Mina, called, like, uh, gut first or brain first, right?
Yeah.
So there is you're absolutely, Chris, you've hit on there is a lot of discussion about where it starts and how that works, like, what if it starts with the gut, what's going on in the gut that then, where you then end up with an effect in the brain, so and this is something that Mina's very much exploring as part of this project, so I don't know, Mina, if you wanna.
Yeah. So it's actually it hits it right on the nail. Because exactly. So there's this idea that there's two types of Parkinson's, a body first Parkinson's and a brain first Parkinson's. And the body first Parkinson's, firstly, this has to do with the idea of alpha synuclein aggregation, the site where they start, where alpha synuclein starts to aggregate, and then where does it spread? So it has to be it's tied into this idea, and so for body first Parkinson's, the idea is that the alpha synuclein starts to aggregate in gut cells. For one reason or another. One of the reasons why we think it's been hypothesized that it's due to environmental factors, and that could be from toxins, like whatever toxins are associated with Parkinson's, from pesticides to heavy metals to whatever they are, all the way to maybe dysbiosis. So maybe certain toxins that are produced by gut bacteria, maybe inflammatory processes that occur because of gut dysbiosis. And just to kind of explain what dysbiosis is a kind a like an unhealthy microbiome. Basically, it's when you go from a microbiome, and just to also be clear, a microbiome means not just bacteria, but it's also viruses and it's fungi. It's all of these. It's everything but our human cells that
Lives in your gut.
every
Not
yes,
you.
everything that lives in our gut and on us. There's a skin microbiome. There's an oral microbiome. There's like whatever every we're covered in these really, really cool things. And they have a very interesting and very important and convoluted role in our health that it is difficult to really understand because it is a very dynamic thing because there are so many different kinds of just like let's say bacteria, and there's so many processes happening in our body, and all of these interactions, this is just so many different combinations and permutations. There's just it's really and this is where like it's so wonderful that there's this ability to take all that data and to analyze it with AI models where you can make when you can kind of make predictions, when you can kind of be able to look at all of this information and then
Take patient A and look at
yeah.
what the makeup of their gut microbiome is, and then look at how that correlates with their disease, like progression or type or, um,
Exactly.
whatever, and it's interesting because there's so much emphasis now in the popular literature about eating fermented foods, and that's
Mhm.
really all about, the effects that that has, like, you're eating foods that are rich in good microbiome, yogurt. So all of that is really about, eating foods or taking things into your digestive system that produce, like, a healthy microbiome. And really what Mina's trying to understand is really to get down to, well, what components, what bacteria, fungi, whatever, what is it in the microbiome that's linked to, like, what is it about exercise that's helping produce a healthy microbiome, which is then having an effect in terms of progression of Parkinson's. And there is data out there from Parkinson's patients on what is in their microbiome, and it can be linked to these factors. So exercise, microbiome, disease progression.
Yeah.
Would it be safe to consider that Parkinson's, maybe if we're talking body first, that maybe Parkinson's really kind of started to take off in the advent of processed foods.
Possibly, or it also something like industrialization, because there is this link. So one of the pesticides that we've studied extensively that's been shown to be a major risk factor for Parkinson's disease is paraquat.
Yeah.
And, like if you're somebody who's a farm worker or working out in the fields, you can take in paraquat, you can breathe it in. So, or you can take it in through the nose, oral. Um, you can digest it into digestive system. It can be on your skin, so exposure, right, to with industrialization and I yes, also the foods that we take in and what's contained, good and bad, within the foods that could cause
Yeah.
inflammation. It could those things could impact on the health of your microbiome.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Mhm.
You were gonna say something, Dr. Schmidt?
Oh, so I think that Julie, I think that um, I think it's just it's a very interesting question because it's the nutrients are they're so important. I see it like in my personal experience that it's very important, the foods that we eat and the nutrients that we obtain. And it's not just for the direct effect of those nutrients on our body, but it's also if those nutrients are also being processed by our microbiome, by our specifically our gut microbiome. And so it's just very fascinating. Like to right now, we're doing this analysis. This is in collaboration with Sean Gibbons' lab at the Institute for Systems Biology, associated with the University of Washington, where we're trying to look at how microbes aren't just these isolated uh, things. They talk to each other. They some microbes can take something that you ate, and they might be they might be very important in taking those things and really digesting them, and making like a product that is then available for other bacteria. And you have this kind of chain, and it's like this communication. And in Parkinson's, there's like it's not just about only certain bacteria not being there, but it's also about those bacteria not being able to talk to each other because they have this interdependency where one bacteria somewhere down the line is dependent on one of those early bacteria, which are called keystone bacteria. And so to me, like I kind of
Well, it's like it's an effect
yeah,
for it's an
exactly.
amplification, right?
Hmm.
If you
Yeah.
if you're taking something in that a bacteria is using to produce additional types of healthy bacteria, or
Yeah.
conversely, additional unhealthy
Yeah. Yeah.
bacteria, that then also ultimately what those are doing as a whole to produce factors, metabolites, that
Yeah.
are used. Like a good example is there's a so people like pomegranates are considered a health food, and when you eat pomegranates, they are actually converted by your gut microbiome to this component called urolithic acid. And urolithic acid is something that has positive effects in terms of like we have some data in preclinical models that it improves brain function. And there's a lot of our lab and other labs. And then there are some studies that have been done in preclinical models and in humans that it improved muscle function, and especially the loss people experience muscle function with age. So it is this kind of idea that you're taking in foods and you're taking exactly what you're saying, Mina, that what you're taking in foods that have nutrients on their own that we use, but you're also taking in things that are then being processed by your microbiome and to into good things. So you need to in order to have the release of those positive factors, you need to have a healthy microbiome to let that happen. Uh, yeah, so having a healthy microbiome is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also just, Chris asked us before about that there are two types of Parkinson's, and I think I never looped back to
The
kind of
brain first,
the
right?
brain. Yes, the brain first. And what I just wanted to highlight was that that the studies. So this is like studies from Borgermer's lab. He's at Aarhus University in Denmark, and he published with Horsager is the other author. They've had these two papers at least that have made observed that in general it's possible to group people with Parkinson's into one or the other group based off of their symptoms, especially in what's called the prodromal phase, which is like the phase when people are getting Parkinson's, but it's not clinically apparent. At least, like it's kind of hard for me to say because I'm not a clinician, but there are clinical factors, but I don't necessarily like. For example, if someone has REM sleep disorder, which is a body first symptom, um, h- I'm not sure. I just don't know. But if you would go into the clinic and people will say that you have Parkinson's at this point, and this could be 10 years, 20 years before you are really diagnosed.
So, for example, with
Yeah.
the gut, it's like people 10, 20 years beforehand might have, constipation.
Constipation.
And
Yes.
actually, I should say my mother um, was diagnosed, and I mean, it was quite late, but in her 80s with Parkinson's, and 10 or 20 years before she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, she was diagnosed with irritable bowel disease, and so there are folks that are diagnosed with these gastrointestinal problems that then go on 10, 20 years later to be, and that's believed to be, it's not that everybody with irritable bowel ends up with Parkinson's, but it can be something that's a prodromal precursor indicator, or loss of smell,
Yeah.
right? But you're saying REM sleep. There are all of these things that now clinicians have noticed can happen um, before a clinical diagnosis of
Yeah.
that, and so that we should be paying attention to as potential biomarkers, but it also helps us learn more about the mechanisms, that it's not, all of a sudden popping up in the brain, that there may be things going on in the gut that are driving these gastrointestinal issues that then in turn may be contributing. It starts in the body and in the gut, but they may be contributing to susceptibility for Parkinson's disease 10, 20 years down the line. So part of the exciting thing about what Mina's looking at is, if you have somebody who has these gastrointestinal issues, are you able to go in at that prodromal stage and give something that's like a exercise mimetic, probiotic, or even at later stage, like what stage could you go in? And I don't know, I mean, if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so our perspective is definitely the microbiome. And yes, like, can you? I I think that I think that our work in general is kind of not just in the prodromal phase, but also like down the line. I think one of the things that I feel especially impacted by is when someone has Parkinson's for quite a long time. It's like y y people continue to take medication, the medication has side effects, it becomes more difficult to move, there's, like, less and potentially less things that you can do that can help alleviate your symptoms, and so some of the other studies, they're usually focused on earlier stages when interventions are more possible, and that makes complete sense, but there isn't a lot of focus on people who are down the line for obvious reasons. This is where potentially, maybe because the microbiome is so malleable, where you could maybe interfere with someone's health more easily, because you can change the microbiome either through antibiotics, which have also been shown, antibiotics for treatment of SIBO has been shown to help improve Parkinson's symptoms, for example, and then dosing maybe with some known bacteria like probiotics. And this is like where our work comes in too. Like, yeah, can you add in bacteria that are increased when we exercise in people with Parkinson's? Maybe this will have an important effect on their symptomatology. And so I kind of, but like earlier on, yes, like I think that, you know, since there's this idea of two different types of Parkinson's, there's potentially also many different types of ways that they can be treated, and those ways could be quite different. And so maybe if someone starts to exhibit certain symptoms early on, and they're caught early on, maybe just altering diet, maybe, for example, motility. That motility is something that not only is it just a feature potentially of Parkinson's, but it's also something that exacerbates Parkinson's, and it's also something that can slow medication effects, and obviously getting rid of toxins from your body and many other
Gut motility, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so even coming in not just with probiotics, which is our idea and something that I really love the effect of microbiome, but and that has an effect on your microbes can have an effect on your gut motility, but also nutrients like switching your diet, feeding your bacteria. If we're talking about bacteria with nutrients that maybe it's like let's say increasing your fiber intake, which would improve your motility, which would potentially decrease your symptoms. Potentially, it could have an important effect there. And so, just to your point, Julie, about catching things early and in different treatments, it's also about understanding the underlying cause. So, if it's a body first Parkinson's, then maybe that's a very heavily dependent upon someone's diet, someone's stress levels, someone's exercise abilities, and trying to tweak these things that could slow down the progression of Parkinson's if caught maybe early on. And then with brain first, it would be a different approach. I'm not, I think I'm more gut focused, but I'm learning more about
Yeah.
the brain. And there it's also, alpha synuclein, the spread of alpha synuclein has a different path. For example, how it affects the vagus nerve, and so which is the gut brain axis. And so that's the part of our body that helps the gut and the brain communicate, and the brain and the gut communicate. And it's important for our rest and digest. And this is what is heavily kind of impacted in Parkinson's. And the most I know about it is coming from the body first perspective, where that the gut, the gastrointestinal system has a direct connection to this vagus nerve, and you can actually alter the function of that nerve. You can increase its functionality by providing certain gut metabolites, or certain having a certain gut microbiome that produces metabolites that can activate that nerve and help you enter more of this rest digest, more balanced kind of state that is heavily affected by Parkinson's. Um, yeah.
There's also, it makes me think of, because the loss of smell, there's also,
Mhm.
so, things coming from the gut and what toxins or nutrients or
Mhm.
whatever, but there's
Mhm.
also this idea of like you're smelling, or you're bringing things in through the olfactory system, and there another neuronal connection. So as Mina's saying, the connection from the gut to the brain is this vagus nerve. There between the nose and the brain, or olfactory system, there's an olfactory connection, and there's
Mhm.
some school of thought that if you're taking something in you're through the nose and you're impacting an alpha-synuclein aggregation there, it's going by a different route into the brain, that then then gut. So I guess that might be another body first, although there's again kind of a school of thought that that somebody who is more being affected by things being taken in through the olfactory system, that may more directly have an effect on your cortex. And so what we know as Lewy body disorder, like what Bruce Willis's, that's also alpha-synuclein, but it's manifesting more in terms of cognition than motor defect, as you see
Mhm.
with sort of traditional gut brain Parkinson's.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like also it's like what's coming into your body, good or bad, and where it's coming in, and then how it's
Manifesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pathway by which it's getting into
Yeah.
the brain, and where in the brain it's going. Is it going to your basal ganglia, which is more motor movement, or is it going into your cortex, which is more cognition? So it's very interesting, and there's a lot of permutations to consider.
I want to switch gears because there was something I wanted to ask about in the paper that you all had put out, which was the biological aging versus uh, normal aging, or what people consider.
Mhm. Is this like chronological versus
Yeah, yeah,
biological aging? Okay.
right,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Y-
because here people used to, I guess, researchers never considered aging as a part of the process. When because if I look at research, they uh, will look at something that it's an A. A leads to B leads to C,
Mhm.
and they just kind of they string it together. So I'm not doing them justice, and I apologize, but
Yeah. Yeah. Julie, yeah, I think it's this is if Chris, if I understand correctly, it's just that there's this really interesting concept that we have this idea like we're aging chronologically. You turn you're one age that one year, one age to different year, and you're aging, right? Your age is increasing. But there's this actually there's also a biological age where which can be quite different from your chronological age. And this is where we see really interesting things about how if people are, exercising, or living this like really, really good lifestyle, they might be 50 years old, but biologically they're actually 10 years younger, if not more, because they're taking care of their body. Julie, you probably
Yeah,
have
I mean,
more of a perspective
there's
on.
a very something that's caused a lot of excitement in the field of bi biology of aging in general, this idea of what people call biological clocks. So it is this idea that chronologically, person A is 60 years old and person B is 60 years old, but lifestyle, as Mina's saying, like you're exercising, you're eating right, you're sort of doing whatever. I mean, there's two components. There's the sort of things that you can do or the things that you can control, like how much you exercise and how you're eating and reducing stress levels, etc. So there's those components that can feed into how well you age biologically. And then there are some sort of genetic factors that can feed into that as well. But there's a lot of now studies in the aging field where people are looking at individuals, and they're actually looking at their chromatin, their genes, and they're asking how the chromatin ages, because a lot of the aging of the DNA and the chromatin is dependent on environmental factors, and there's indication that people who are exposed to more detrimental environmental factors. Their chromatin ages faster, and then they are actually biologically. You can have, so as Mina's saying, you can have somebody who's 60 but you could have someone who's chronologically 60 who biologically their body looks more like a 70-year-old, and conversely you can have somebody who biologically or chronologically is 60, but their biology is younger. And there are things that people recommend, and it's everything that you hear all the time, but they recommending trying to live a healthy lifestyle, and that applies to lots of age-related diseases, and we think including Parkinson's disease, that exercise is important. And that's borne out by studies that have been done in the field that suggests that exercise is one of the things that can slow progression and or halt or perhaps even reverse. We don't know. Yeah.
It does it make more sense? As I said, there's such a movement towards people wanting to do the whole body, um, or there's more of a focus on it. Well, wha-
Yeah, I would say yes, in the sense that if you think about the history of Parkinson's disease, it was sort of, it's clearly been around for centuries, and as people lived longer, we saw more of it because it is something that is age related. You see it more commonly in older people, but it was really Parkinson's, over 200 years ago. Noticed people had what was called the shaking palsy, and diagnosed people with this motor dysfunction, Parkinson's, and a lot of the research over the years was really concentrated on the area of the brain where people are losing neurons that are involved in controlling motor movements. So most of the studies were really brain centric and looking at the brain. And I think over the last decade or so, it's become more and more clear that Parkinson's is something that I would say is systemic, that you are getting whole body, you're getting contributions from the gut and from the heart and from the olfactory system, and that applies to Parkinson's, and it also applies to a lot of age-related conditions where there's so much crosstalk between different organs in the body that we didn't really appreciate. Like 20, 30 years ago, we didn't really appreciate how much all of that. And a lot of this was people really kind of noticing. It was like, oh, isn't this interesting? It's like there's this pretty substantial number of people who had uh, gastrointestinal problems, and then they end up with Parkinson's. Is that just a coincidence and it's just because 'cause they're aging, or is there a connection? Is there something about what's going on in the gastrointestinal system that is actually mechanistically could be contributing to Parkinson's? And I think that it's exciting. That's kind of where I think the field is now. It's really trying to understand what is it about aging in the body, and how people age differently that could be making them more susceptible to developing diseases like Parkinson's disease. And it just really came from people being observant and seeing that correlation, and now we're kind of being able to rush it down on that a little bit more. Oh, exercise seems to help. Oh, if you could it be that exercise is helping produce a healthy gut, and that's preventing, or that is reducing susceptibility to um, later Parkinson's disease, and what can we figure out about the specifics of that. So I think it's really exciting time in the field.
How close do you think we are to not really a cure, but something that
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like very hopeful in the sense that I think because we're realizing that um, a lot of these things that are these, as Mina was saying, things that happen during the prodromal, we're realizing that a, a lot of different things can happen in the body that could be potential biomarkers. Oh, somebody's got gastrointestinal issues, so they could potentially be more prone to Parkinson's disease. Could we give them um, particular probiotic treatment now that would reduce the potential for them developing? So having these realizing that there are these things that may happen that seem unrelated to brain health, but things that happen in your gut or in your olfactory system that can happen 10 to 20 years in advance that are going to increase susceptibility, and dealing with those. If it is that there's a change in the gut microbiome that can contribute to PD, if you can take care of what's going on in the gut at that stage. So it's having being aware of these changes in what we call biomarkers, and then what can we do um, to stop that process. And I think this idea that you don't have to have necessarily a fancy medication, that it may be as simple as a probiotic formulation. That gives me a lot of hope that we're on the right track.
Yeah. And just to also add that now with the ability to people can track their symptoms using wearables, using or participating in research. To say this also with like a little bit of caution in the sense that when someone has Parkinson's, not necessarily do they want to be thinking about it all the time, just as anyone, who's going through it, But what I want to say here is that sometimes when you notice something is a little bit off, it's very possible to tweak something maybe that you didn't notice, something that you were eating, something that you were doing, something you were exposed to that could have increased your symptoms at that time. And being aware of this and kind of tracking this in some way, either through a wearable or through a journal, or sometimes like in my family, it's happened a few times that my dad has like many different medications, and um he started exhibiting symptoms that were very odd that my mom noticed, and she jumped on it very quickly and realized that he started taking a new medication, which in some people with Parkinson's was really well, it actually improves their symptoms, but in the case of my dad, it actually made things a lot worse.
Wow.
Taking him off of that, and
So it is just kind of personalized, and that's another point with
exactly. Yeah,
PD, one person with PD, one person with PD. There
exactly.
is a lot of, I think of it as a syndrome. There's people who have more tremor or freezing or whatever. And so I think it is, yeah, completely, Mina, keeping track of your individual and
Yeah.
how their diet, exercise, stress levels, and also because often they might be taking many medications, and not every medication works for everybody.
Julie, and also I recently saw like just this image of someone who has motility issues, and their cardiaca levodopa is hanging out in their intestines. It's not dissolving, it's not moving. So, um, so knowing that,
Oh,
yeah,
interesting. So your gut, so your the way your gut, well, that makes sense, right? Because basically you're taking in oral medication, it gets processed in your gut. So if your gut's not processing the medication properly, it's not going to get to your brain where you need it.
Right. Or if you have bacteria that are actually metabolizing the gut, like there was this research at UCSF, and there was a poster that I just saw the other day. There's a microbiome program or like system, something. I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but it started in 2019 at UCSF. And so that's a really important thing too, that our bacteria can be involved in the process of metabolizing our drugs, and they're actually
Right.
doing some of that work, and that means that some of that medication is not actually getting to us as well, which is important to think about.
Yeah.
And
It's also just like this, which is what's great about these kind of, audio casts is getting information out
yeah,
um, to patients and to caregivers and to the public at large that, it's traditionally Parkinson's, it's motor movement, but there are a lot of other components that go into this to be aware of, but I think it can seem overwhelming, but I think it's all to the good, and also to be aware that maybe if we can pick up early on things that potentially could contribute to later susceptibility, then and it could be in fairly straightforward ways, exercise, adjusting diet, nutrition. I think that's all to the good because it's something people can do, on their own. You don't need to go to always good to be working with a motor specialist, but you don't need to go in and get medication necessary, or there's things in addition to that
yes,
that are
there's other tweaks you can do that can help improve how you feel, and which means your symptoms and just how you feel also with non-motor symptoms from,
yeah. Yeah.
you know, yeah, just, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up. I do appreciate the both of you coming and being on. Sorry about the confusion last week. So
as you've noticed, we're chatty, but it's like we're very excited. We're just very excited about the research that we're doing, and if there's any way we can help to disseminate that, we really want to do that, and we appreciate you being willing to interview us.
sure. Hopefully there'll be another. Thank you for listening, and once again, thank you to Dr. Julie Andersen and Dr. Minna Schmidt from the Buck Institute on Aging for coming on today. The music for this episode, titled Open Arms, was written by Adam Drake and Tom Jenkins. This and other titles can be found at audionetworks.com. Thank you for listening.